cringy. I want to bring in my guest, though. I am joined with the man of the hour, a fellow Trekkie that I've learned, Dan Kovalik.
How you doing? Great to see you. Great to see
That
you.
is a high honor, sir. Dan
Thank
Kovalik,
you.
he's an
I
American
appreciate
human rights and labor rights lawyer and peace activist. Um, Dan, thank you for joining me, man. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm always happy to. I enjoy it.
So I came across, the ceasefire. The ceasefire is either dead or seemed to be laying on its last leg. Excuse me. There was reporting that came out that Donald Trump was having back-channel communications with Hamas. That's mind-blowing,
Yeah.
especially coming out of a Biden administration that under no circumstances would challenge doing something like that. But to be fair to Trump, he has said, look, I'm willing to talk to people we consider to be enemies. Otherwise, how do you ever negotiate in order to bring conflicts to an end? And he's right. Now, the catch becomes, what is the conversation Donald Trump is having with Hamas? Now, while he's having these back-channel communications with Hamas, he is saber-rattling on Twitter, effectively, all hell is going to break loose on Gaza, if indeed effectively saying collective punishment if you don't give up the hostages. But keep in mind, the reason that he didn't, Hamas, stop with the hostages because Israel was flagrantly breaking the ceasefire agreement. Give me your take on this. What do you think is going on behind the scenes? Do you think this is one of those things where Trump is escalating in public while working behind the scenes for peace, kind of like with North Korea, where, he's calling the man Rocket Man at the United Nations, and yet was perfectly willing to have negotiations in order to bring hostilities down? What is your sense of this? Because I got to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what's going on with this.
It's hard to know, of course. Though I do think the fact he's talking directly to Hamas is a good sign, right? I mean, I think it has to be some indication that he's trying to find a way to prevent the war in Gaza from restarting. And we know, by the way, from Hamas and Israel that Trump was crucial in getting this ceasefire to begin with, right? Even before he was president. And again, I mean, it's kind of hard to sit here and be, praising Trump, but I mean, the devil is, should get his due. And the truth is we're now almost, 40 some, maybe almost 50 days into this ceasefire. I have friends in Gaza that I communicate with almost every day. And they are, they might be alive today because of this ceasefire. Every day there's a ceasefire means a day that they can exist and live. So it has to be welcome. The fact he's talking to Hamas is not only a sign that, he wants to find a solution to this, but also isn't that a message to Israel? Like, the Israeli government must be shocked that he's talking to Hamas. I mean, this probably upsets them greatly. Like, it's a message to them that they're not just going to get their way.
Yeah.
So anyway, I guess my optimistic side is positive about this. I could be disappointed tomorrow, but today I feel like this is a good sign. And I do support Trump's willingness to talk to people, to talk to Putin,
Agreed.
to talk to Hamas, to talk to the North Korean government. Biden wouldn't speak to anyone. He didn't speak to Russia for years. He wouldn't allow his staff to talk to their counterparts in Russia. This is insane.
They believe in forever wars. I mean, because otherwise it's just a forever war. I mean, this notion that you're going to be able to dictate terms to somebody, it's insane. And I never understood this policy of just, we're just going to be at odds forever. We're not going to negotiate. We're not going to talk. We're not going to come to, we're not even going to acknowledge that they have security interests that may be different from our own, right? It's a very weird way of doing politics. But that was the way that they operated. Kamala Harris was the same way.
And it's dangerous. I mean, again, when you talk about Russia, a nuclear armed state, it's in our own self-interest to talk to them, right? To make sure there's not misunderstandings, to make sure that, nuclear missiles aren't accidentally shot off because of these misunderstandings. I mean, every president of the United States since World War II understood that. And somehow Biden, he didn't get that memo. He didn't get the memo that it was important to have those discussions.
But see, it's not just Biden, though. It's Democrats at large. Like, meaning any random Democrat that you put into the spot would have done the exact same thing. They seem to have the same mindset. I'll give you an example. Do you remember when there used to be a time where lefties were anti-war?
Mm-hmm.
And, I've had Daniel McAdams on the show, and I remember Daniel McAdams said that the Ron Paul Institute used to be able to work across the aisle with lefties in order to pass or to push for, let's say, anti-war initiatives and those type of things. And he said that is no longer the case. I remember when I believe it was the Progressive Caucus put out a tepid letter saying, hey, maybe the U.S. should work towards peace as opposed to continuously escalating. They were shouted down, and within a day or so, they had to pull the letter, basically, literally rescind a letter that just said, maybe we should work towards peace.
Right.
That's where they are today. How did that happen? I got to be honest. I don't quite know how that happened. I don't know when that change took place. That wasn't the perspective of lefties. I mean, even Bernie Sanders is out there right now, screaming for war, saying we need to keep this war going on.
And Elizabeth
with
Warren. Yeah. No, this is a sea change. I mean, you're right. I mean, not only was it that it was in the day. Look, first of all, we'll start with the premise that the Democratic presidents were as hawkish or more so at times than the Republicans, right? But the base of the parties and the kind of rank and file Congress people tended to be more dovish within the Democratic Party, right? And I think, so like, for example, and I was just talking to someone about this yesterday, a lot of my liberal friends I marched arm in arm with against the Iraq War back in 2002, 2003, right? Now, those are the same people now that won't even talk to me because of Russia, Ukraine, okay? So what happened? I think a couple things happened. Obama happened. Obama made war look nice again, right? He destroyed Libya. He destroyed Syria.
Yep.
He destroyed Yemen, and no one cared, right? You had democracy now kind of applauding the wars, particularly in Libya and Syria, and a lot of lefties going along with that. I think Obama was a very key, and it's known that the CIA wanted Obama to be president. They thought he would be a very good figurehead for the empire. He would make the empire look nice, even if it was doing terrible things. So I think Obama was key. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I think that all that was compounded, of course, in 2016 when Hillary lost. And then she and the Democrats and the intelligence agencies concocted the Russiagate scandal, which was a lie. But the whole thing was that Russia somehow allegedly interfered in the U.S. elections to get Trump elected. And most Democrats went along with that lie. And most Democrats in the base still believe in that lie to some extent.
Yeah.
So that groomed people, again, particularly in the Democratic Party, to hate Russia, right? It really primed the liberals for the war in Ukraine that was about to happen, and to support Ukraine against Russia. So I think those are the big things that happened. That is what led the Democratic Party from top to bottom to support these wars. And of course, I guess there's a third thing. Well, it's related to the second, and that is the Trump derangement syndrome. And that is that because Trump wants peace with Russia, the Democrats are automatically going to want war, right? If he wants vanilla ice cream, they're going to want chocolate. I mean, there is that too, that really, frankly, childish aspect to it. I think all those things combined have made the Democratic Party what it is today, and it's a terrible thing. The Democratic Party is an enemy of humanity. I hate to say that, and I was talking to a old time lefty friend of mine, mentor. He said, yeah, liberals are now, they're the enemy more than the conservatives. And I agree with that for the reasons
Yeah.
we're saying. Even when you saw Trump's speech to Congress, he called out Elizabeth Warren saying, oh, do you want more war? And she was clapping, like a seal. That's where we're at now, where the liberals are now pro-war. And it's bizarre. It is something that should be condemned. I don't think it's inevitable that it'll stay that way. And I think the Democratic Party, they're going to have to do some soul searching or they're not going to win anymore. I mean, again, then you have the irony is that it's the Republican base, the MAGA base, that has a very large contingency of people that want the wars to end. I mean,
Yes.
Trump ran on a platform to certainly end the war in Ukraine. He seems to at least be attempting to do that.
Mm-hmm.
He's been much more hawkish when it comes to Palestine, but now you have him talking to Hamas. So we'll see. But I also think Trump represents the part of the ruling class that has decided we're about to go bankrupt and we just can't afford these wars anymore.
Yeah, ish. I mean, yes, obviously, with $37 trillion in debt.
Yeah.
And yeah, totally agree with you where he's talking about like drawing down the military, all that stuff. I mean, he's going after the CIA. He's saying he wants to cut the military by like 40%, something to that effect.
Yeah, 35%, I think, over.
By the same token, though, like every quote unquote savings that he finds, he's just putting it in a tax cut. So it's not like he's cutting the debt. It's not like he's cutting the deficit. Like, for example, the no tax on tips. No tax on tips is going to be like $20 trillion, some insane amount of money.
That much money, I had no idea. Wow.
It's an because if you think about it, most jobs are service jobs. And if you're talking about, let's say, YouTube, okay, if somebody gives a super chat, is that a tip?
Right.
If somebody gets
Uber drivers, of course, Amazon drivers.
Exactly. And you're talking about this entire level of the economy that no longer the government gets. Yeah. I'll give you another example. If you're a waiter, let's say you make $2.50 an hour. Everything else above that is a tip. So if they bring in $50,000 a year, okay, $2.50 is the actual wage. Everything above that is just a tip. So that is money the federal government doesn't get. So the federal government under that model gets taxes on $2.50 an hour. I don't even know if they would even qualify to pay taxes. Like, again, as a lefty, I don't hate it. But I look at this and think to myself, okay, for all of this talk about cutting the deficit, he's just going to expand it. I mean, the last time Trump was in, he ballooned the deficit by like $9 trillion.
Right. Yeah, no, the Republicans are the ones who are actually the best at expanding the deficit, as you say, because of their regressive taxation, because they don't tax the rich. I mean, because, of course, one way to solve that is to tax the rich more, and he's not going to do that.
He's not going to do
it. But look, I agree with you. I mean, again, and especially when it comes to Trump, to look for any consistency in what he does is a fool's errand. I mean, it's just not going to. It's not going to. So
I would say though that he does have a tendency to escalate, to de-escalate.
Yes,
and, Garland,
foreign policy. Yes, of course. Yeah.
Exactly. And Garland points it out. Garland was like, "I'm not going to listen to anything he says. I'm going to look at what he does."
Yeah.
And his point is, I'm not going to freak out over any, perturbation. Donald Trump says some of anything at any particular moment. It doesn't really give you too much context. What he does matters. And I think the conversation with Hamas matters.
Yes.
I think the fact that he told the Muslim community, I'm going to end wars, not start them, I do think that matters. I think the problem is Netanyahu does not want this deal. He wants this deal over with. He wants to get back to the killing, murder.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess the catch becomes, does Trump's want to save face matter more than Netanyahu's want to resume the war? And I don't have an answer for it.
I think none of us do. And I think, again, with Trump, the problem with Trump is also he seems to have attention deficit disorder. That is to say that he gets interested in something and then he just loses interest, right? Like North Korea was a classic one. We're going to make peace with North Korea. It didn't happen right away. Forget about that. Let's move on to the next thing. So he could get interested in talking about peace in the Middle East, and then he gets distracted. A beautiful woman walks by, and he's on to something else.
Yeah.
So, I think that's always a danger. But yeah, this is, look, clearly the very fact the U.S. is talking to Hamas is going to delay any ability of Netanyahu to restart the war. Like, it's an important act. It should be welcome, And, but we'll see. Again, with Trump, you just don't know. But I do believe, I was a labor lawyer by trade. I was a labor lawyer for 26 years. And in the National Labor Relations Act, which is passed, I believe, in 1935, the whole basis of it that I learned as a labor lawyer, the whole basis which is to encourage collective bargaining, the whole basis is that it assumes as long as parties are at the table talking, there's always hope for a resolution. There's always chance for a peaceful resolution to the problem. So the fact that the U.S. is talking to Hamas should be cause for hope. As long as they're talking, there's a chance at a solution. So I welcome that. And any sane person should.
One of the other stories that came out is that Hamas has effectively said that they would take a back seat if it allows the ceasefire to go to the next stage.
Right.
That we don't have to be part of the government. Obviously, we're going to be there, meaning it's not like we're going to evaporate. But if the public chooses something else, fair enough. We would accept that if that's what's necessary for us to proceed with the ceasefire. Simultaneous to this, you have the Arab League that effectively came out backing Egypt's deal. I believe it went up. I think it was like $20 billion or something like that in order for the rebuilding to take place in Gaza. So you have these two strands taking place simultaneously. Obviously, it seems that Hamas legitimately wants a deal and they want to be able to get the building to take place. Now, again, the issue here is Israel. What's wild about this, Trump knows this. Trump has said as much when he said he met Mahmoud Abbas, he met Netanyahu. Netanyahu didn't want a deal. Mahmoud Abbas did want a deal. And in that vein, it seems that Hamas also wants a deal, even to the point of stepping away from the governmental space. What's your read of this? I mean, because the reality of it is, regardless of what Hamas and the Arab League wants, Israel is the sticking point. And that is something that Trump is going to ultimately have to keep in line. That is not something any of the other actors can keep on in line. But is it even possible to rebuild Gaza like that for $20 billion?
It's going to take a lot more than that. It'll probably take just that amount to clear the rubble, which apparently is going to take decades to do, just to clear the rubble before you can even start rebuilding. I mean, that's how bad it is. It's a real, terrible thing that Israel inflicted on Gaza with the U.S. help, of course.
Yeah.
But look, 20 billion is a start anyway. It's better than nothing. In terms of who can, get Israel in line, obviously the U.S. is the country that can really do that by simply saying, we're not going to fund this war anymore. And we're not going to fund you anymore. And if the U.S. didn't, Israel could not prosecute this anymore, and their economy would collapse as well. It's almost collapsing anyway. At the same time, look, Egypt and Jordan and other countries also could play a role in keeping them in line if they're willing to, frankly, threaten military action against Israel. I mean, Israel, I do think, is in a vulnerable, but they won't probably.
That's what I was saying. They never do. They never do that.
They never do. Well, they haven't since 1973, not
Right.
Since President Nasser was leading Egypt. And at the same time, though, the leaders of these countries do have a problem, and that is that their own populations are demanding some action to help Palestine, and a lot of their military leaders are also demanding that. So they're going to have to do the calculus of whether, it's worth getting the U.S. aids and therefore foregoing, taking on Israel and risk being overthrown in a military coup or a revolution. You have Saudi Arabia, by the way, remember saying they would even give Jordan and Egypt, they'd make up for any aid they would lose if they were from the U.S., if they, took on Israel. So we'll see. I mean, you're right that I think it's a very remote possibility that they would do that. Though I do think in the case of Egypt and the case of Jordan, if there is a real threat that Palestinians are going to be ethnically cleansed en masse into those countries, again, for their own, national self-interest, they may have to take on Israel, So we'll see. But all those things you got a lot of moving pieces. And I think, the fact that there's a ceasefire in place now, and the fact that a lot of these players, certainly all the Arab world, does not want to see that war restart.
Right.
It appears Trump doesn't want it to restart. The fact that is the case, again, gives me some hope that it won't. So
I guess my feeling is after October 7th, I kept thinking to myself, we can't go back to this.
yeah,
Like after all of these people been killed, all of these women and children have been killed, all of this land has been destroyed. I think it's like 80 to 90% of the living dwellings have just been gone. I mean, it is hard to wrap your head around that much destruction over the course of a year and a half. And so then it becomes, okay, so what is the plan for people to move back into the same situation again? Like, even if we go with the idea of rebuilding, we're just rebuilding back into an open air ghetto again. How is that a positive development? I just don't see how. It's just frustrating. I don't even live in frustrating.
I agree with you, though. I do think the time is on the side of the Palestinian people. If they are able to live and exist on that land, I do think Israel. They will be able to essentially outlast Israel. I think Israel is in a grave societal crisis. Economic crisis, political, diplomatic crisis, all these things.
Mm-hmm.
You have a large number of suicides amongst the military and also domestic violence amongst personnel who fought in Gaza and then went home. And of course, the elephant in the living room is the reason that is happening is because they did terrible, terrible things. And I think they can't live with themselves. And that's a huge problem. And I think that the military leaders certainly know that they don't want to send people back into Gaza if they don't have to. I mean, because again, the society is fraying. And, they know the world doesn't support them anymore. And that's an incredible thing that happened after October 7th. I just saw a poll came out, I think, yesterday in the United States that now most people don't support Israel in the United States, but most people do support Palestine. Essentially,
I saw that.
Yeah.
That is an astonishing poll. Because of the shift. Poll. Yeah. That's a hell of a poll. I mean, that has never been the case in my lifetime.
Never. And in other countries, it's going to be much more, again, lopsided towards support for Palestine. But in the fact that in the U.S., you have a poll like that has to be set off alarm bells in Tel Aviv that their days are numbered.
Yeah, at some point there's going to be a political actor that gets into power that is not going to toe this line in this way, especially with the public taking a different tact like this. No, you might be right. There's another thing that came out in Al Jazeera today. Well, I guess there are two things. Can we talk about Syria for a bit?
Of course we can.
So HTS is under assault. There's an uprising that apparently is taking place in the coastal regions of Syria that has been
Yeah.
going after HTS.
Hmm.
Turkey has gotten involved. They've sent their military, I mean, just racing in order to back HTS up. Apparently, there are drones, airplanes, and all of these things that are effectively backing HTS. Most of this is, well, for one, because jihadists overthrew the government. But on top of that, went on a killing spree with religious minorities, Alawites, Christians, Sunnis, etc., and has been doing so for the last several months since they've taken over, which is creating a massive backlash in the country. And I got to be honest, on some level, an expected backlash in the country. Give me your take. Give us a bit of context on what is
Yes,
happening on the ground there.
I was in Syria about a month ago,
Were
and
you?
yeah, yeah, I was in Lebanon and Syria. So I did see, and I interviewed people. I interviewed, Alawites and Christian priests, and a Christian archbishop.
Mhm.
And the truth is that the religious minorities are being terrorized, and they feel terrorized, and especially the Alawites, who a lot of them are being kidnapped, killed, particularly in the city of Homs, but not
Yeah.
only there. And as you say, now there's revenge killings against people who are doing that. The truth is the country, the more I see, the country could be on the verge of a civil war. The other thing that the HTS did, I mean, first of all, they've really done nothing positive for the country since they've come to power. And the new self-appointed leader, Jelani, hasn't even addressed the people, by the way. He's met with all these foreign dignitaries
Yeah.
because he wouldn't, as one person pointed out, because he won't even speak with a Syrian accent, Um, a lot of these jihadist fighters that have taken over are foreign fighters. In fact, I believe almost every high-ranking official he's appointed is actually Turkish, not Syrian.
Oh.
So there's a lot of resentment that's growing against the new government. The other thing the new government did is fire 1 million public employees, mostly along religious sectarian lines. So now you have all these public employees without jobs, even though public employees who have jobs are not getting paid, or they're not getting paid on time. Plus you have these, assaults against minorities. So HTS is not popular, I believe. Um, I think that they are going to face more and more opposition, more and more resistance. There are resistance militias springing up that are fighting the HTS, that are fighting Israel, that is now occupying a lot of the southern part of Syria
Uh-huh.
in lieu of HTS doing it, because they're not doing it. HTS is not taking on Israel. So now you have these militias that are rising up to do that work. It's a very chaotic and it's a very explosive situation. It's a disaster, is what it is. So we should pay a lot of attention to it, watch what's happening every day. But it's not good.
Wow. What is your expectation in regards to outcome? I mean, Turkey, I would imagine, has to invest. Well, like I said, they've been sending military arms and everything else in order to pacify the population. This seems to be originating in the coastal regions, correct?
Well, yes, to some extent, yeah, because there are large Alawite populations in coastal towns like Latakia and Tartus,
Mhm.
um, uh, and Homs as well, though I don't think Homs is a coastal city. But yeah, and also there is a certain, I think there's a lot of holdovers from the Assad government that are in the coastal regions. Plus, of course, you have the Russian military bases there. So there's a lot of, it is fertile ground
Yeah.
for resistance. So I
But
think you'll see a lot of resistance coming out of those areas.
by the way, didn't George Bush do something similar in Iraq where he fired all of the public workers or everybody that was associated with the Ba'ath Party, which was effectively
Yeah,
everybody that was in
and
government?
everyone agreed that was a disaster because even
Yeah.
they fired all the security personnel, the police, which by the way HTS did as well. They fired all the former government police. And yeah, what happened in Iraq was again pretty predictable, and that is that security totally broke down, and you had these ISIS type groups that emerged
Mhm.
in that power vacuum. The very same could easily happen in Syria because yes, HTS did the very same thing.
Wow.
They don't even have the bureaucracies running. They don't have the courts running. There is no rule of law. There's no, there's virtually no police forces.
Wait, so the gangs that the jihadists of these fighters that are running around in pickup trucks, that is the only quote unquote government that's
That is
there. They
correct.
don't have
Right.
the
It's those right.
wow.
So when I was in Damascus, for example, those were the guys that were the police. These guys dressed in fatigues with the machine guns, and they look like what they are, Al Qaeda. That's where they came from. That's what they are, and that's who's policing the country. So, and by the way, within HTS there are 26 different factions, and there are factions within those factions. And so this is a mess. These folks are not poised. They're not equipped to govern. I'm not sure they really want to govern. So we'll see. I think there's a very good chance that HTS will not be in power. But what arises to take power in the vacuum, I don't know. What I do fear is in that power vacuum that you'll have Israel and Turkey step in, and the U.S. and France, and that you're going to see Syria essentially cannibalized. I think that may be a possibility. So,
What are people saying on the ground? Like, what's my producer? Um, my producer, when I was working at the radio station, he has family in Syria and in Lebanon, and he pointed out that they were terrified when
yeah,
all of this took place. And I would imagine the populations there are probably also terrified. But what are they seeing on a daily basis? Like, for example, going to buy bread, going to, like the most basic things of life. For example, I remember it was a British reporter, and this was when Assad was in power. And he goes into Syria when they're kind of fighting the jihadists off. And he's shocked by the normality. It's like you listen to the radio station, you're going to the barbershop, people are going to stores, people were still living their lives, even though this kind of tragedy was taking place in the background. What is their life like today on the ground? I hope that
well,
makes
it
sense.
it all depends where you live, and it depends on who you are. So in Damascus, I'd say it's more normal than in a lot of other cities. But again, if you're in a religious minority, particularly Alawites, I know a
That's
lot of Alawites are not going outside. That will basically are hiding in their homes because they're afraid of being kidnapped and killed. Um, in terms of the ability to buy things, the good news is prices are dropped quite a bit. But the bad news is people don't have money to buy anything because again, all these people are out of work. So I think initially there was, certainly a significant part of the population that at least was hopeful something better could happen because they were hoping all these sanctions that the U.S. had imposed would be lifted once someone else came to power besides Assad, but that hasn't happened. So and then again you have all these people fired, you have all these sectarian killings. So I think very quickly the optimism that some people had is eroded. I think people now are very afraid of the future. And a lot of people, again, are afraid that they're on the verge of civil war, and no one wants that. I mean, no one in their right mind wants to go back to that. So, but that is what appears to be. happening.
This is going to sound conspiratorial, but was a civil war the point? Like, somebody could make the argument that under no circumstances were they going to allow jihadists to take over Syria. That even though he may, the pet jihadist is doing okay now, at some point that is not going to be true. Israel has even pointed out, we don't trust this guy in the long term, or at the very least, we don't trust the government that's going to come out of a jihadist-led government in the long term. And the belief was that there was no way for HTS to be able to control and keep, let's say, the kettle on Syria. Now, I know Turkey wanted it because for all intents and purposes, they were able to, it's a proxy. They are able to, on some level, have a lot of influence, in which case they can now have some level of control over Syria. But is that something that Israel wants, the US wants, etc.?
I'm not sure they want civil war per se, but I do think they want to balkanize Syria. I think Israel wants to take a piece of it. I think Turkey wants to take a piece of it. Clearly, as you saw what Israel did immediately when HTS took over, they went in and bombed, all the, and all the military bases and all the, basically there's no, they left Syria more or less defenseless. And that was the goal. They do not want a strong Syria. And so they would be happy if it's carved up into, again, by foreign governments, but also, it could be carved up on sectarian lines. There's Alawites now saying they want their own Alawite area, right? Their own area, Alawite republic. I think they want this to look like Yugoslavia. They just want to chop it up, and so there will never be a strong Syria again. I do think that is the goal.
Wow, that is that's
and
tragic.
Yeah,
I mean, you never know. The uprising, if it takes off, it may create something better ultimately. I mean, despite the tragedy, if you have all of these groups that have come together and see themselves as being Syrian, as opposed to, because the truth is, they're like, if U.S. was taken over tomorrow, and somebody came in and says, we are now a religious country, we're now a Muslim extremist country,
right?
There's no way we could tolerate that. Like, it's so off the reservation in regards to normality and what we're accustomed to. Syria is very similar, though.
It's very similar. It's never been that way. It's not. It is a very pluralistic country. They won't tolerate that. They won't tolerate it. So, by the way, I need to run now. I have another interview coming up here. So
no issue. Thank you for this. I really appreciate it. Always enjoy talking to you, my man.
Let's do it again soon. All right. Take care.
Have a good one. Okay. Thank you. Daniel Kovalik. He's an American human rights, labor rights lawyer, peace activist. He's also a professor. At the very least, he used to be. Shout out to him. I really appreciate it.